Thank you for joining this Global Rational User Community webcast. My name is Susanna Spear, Community Manager. Today's webcast is titled Agile Adaptation for Automotive Systems Software. Our presenters are Julian Holmes, Founder, Agile Mentor, and Mitch Vaughn, Technical Delivery Manager and Agile Adoption Leader, Visteon. We'll be taking questions for Julian and Mitch from the audience. Please submit your questions via the chat applet on the right side of the screen. Additionally, you can follow the hashtag GruckAgile on Twitter and continue the conversation there. Submit questions and comments. This webcast will be recorded and provided along with a copy of the slide deck in the Rational Community Resource Library. Please keep an eye out for a follow-up email once that is available within the next day. If you're having technical difficulties, please attempt to reconnect. I am about to hand the controls over to Julian and Mitch without further delay. So I'm just about to hand you over to our presenters.
Okay. So I was trying to say, until I realized nobody could hear me, that myself, I'm Julian Holmes, and Mitch, you've already heard from momentarily anyway, well, planning to present to you today about our Agile adoption story. As you can see from our titles and on the slide here, I work for Agile Mentors and get involved with IBM in many ways around the use of Agile, not only as a method but also within the tools. I'm also well involved with the global rational user community as well. And Mitch, maybe a little bit about yourself.
Okay, I did cover a couple of bits, just a technical delivery manager at Visteon, and so I work really on the embedded software side of development and have been involved with some of the tools and responsibility for our configuration management system over the last few years. And I've also been involved in this Agile adoption as we're moving to a more Agile organization. I'm based in Chelmsford in the UK, but a little bit later on we'll give you a little bit of an overview of who Visteon are, and so you can understand the scale and scope of this rollout.
So thanks, Mitch. So let's have a look at our agenda. So this is a presentation that Mitch and I first gave in Orlando at the Innovate 2014 conference, and what we want to do, as Mitch already said, is give you a bit of a context on who Visteon are and what they were trying to achieve. And then I'll continue with a bit about the journey so far that we've undertaken. Obviously, you don't go to be Agile just for the sake of it. There needs to be a reason, and I want to take you through that as well. I will move on to a few pieces where Mitch contributes some of the specifics he's been doing, and then also about the workshop for change that we've initiated and the work we've been doing there across many different categories of areas that we've had to look at. Plus also look forward to what we're now currently embarking upon and get to the point where we can take any questions from you as well. So the first thing is obviously a bit of context. Mitch, do you want to just give us a few brief words around Visteon, around the organization you work for?
Certainly, yeah, we're an automotive component supplier, one of the biggest in the world. We were formed out of Ford Motor Company back in the year 2000, and since then we've gone through sort of various reorganisations and restructuring. But primarily at the moment we are split into three main product divisions. That's climate, electronics and interiors, and I work in the electronics division, and this is really very much focused around the electronics. We've recently acquired Johnson Controls, which is another major player in the global electronics automotive business, and in some areas that's put us up to number one. You'll hear a little bit more about that because in some respects that's kind of put on hold our Agile deployment, and in some respects hopefully it'll speed it up. But it's made us quite a big organisation. So as it says, 29,000 employees across 30 countries.
Sorry, shift you on there, so you've got a whole more, just the electronics as well. Sorry, Mitch.
On electronics, which is where I'm focused and where Julian and I'll be focused about. It's about 10,500 employees globally. We operate in 20 countries. As it says, 24 manufacturing locations, and we've got tech centres around the world, and primarily to support our global customer base. And we have about $3.3 billion in consolidated sales, so it's a big organisation at the moment.
And I think, Mitch, one thing that people don't begin to realise is Visteon may not be the most commonly known name, but if we move to the next slide, pretty high profile in the vehicles you're engaged with.
Yeah, these are, I think we have, particularly now with the JCI acquisition, I think we have business with all of the major OEMs. Obviously, as Visteon was formed out of Ford Motor Company, Ford were and still remain one of our biggest customers in terms of electronics, but we have our electronics content on pretty much all of the major OEMs around the world. We are, as I said, you've probably not heard of us, but we are there and we are a big player in the business.
And so, obviously, in every one of those solutions there is an element of software involved, and there's been quite some strategic investments been going on recently.
Exactly. I think if you look at our history, I mean, predominantly we're a manufacturing organisation, and the focus has been on the manufacturing and that side of the business. But more and more the content of the systems that we produce is software. More and more we're having to change. The organisation is kind of having to change and pay a lot more attention to software and development processes and development practices. It's a much bigger part of the business. It's a much bigger area where we can differentiate ourselves from other suppliers. And this is, providing functionality to the OEMs is a key, is key in today's world. So in terms of that, this is where the software organisation is focusing. We're looking at continuous improvement, trying to make ourselves better. We're adopting Agile. We're trying to develop internally standardised architecture so that our product domains, we are developing systems globally, that we're trying to develop things that develop as a global base and not reinvent in our various development centres. And we're trying to make obviously more use of the open source community as we're being driven more of a consumer electronics business, and we're trying to adopt more of what would be considered more consumer software development practices, as opposed to a very much more traditional and conservative practices that were where we were previously.
I guess as you grow, you move more towards these goals, because as you just mentioned, with the growth, the consistency is going to be really key. But there's some other goals that were driving us in our initiative too, I guess.
Yeah, the changing customer needs is a key one. As I said, traditionally we are or were a very traditional kind of automotive supplier. Software development was a small part of that, but it's a big part now, and the industry is looking, the OEMs are looking to look at what's going on in the consumer world. They're very fast-paced, changing requirements, new technologies coming in, and we're figuring out, how do we keep up with that? If you look at a vehicle life, typically a vehicle would be designed for a life of at least 10 years. Consumer electronics, a life of 6 to 18 months. Time to market much shorter. So how do we work in that environment? We've got to be far more nimble. We've got to look at what everyone else is doing. Agile was kind of the way forward for us to try and bring in some of that fast change of pace. We've still got to keep the quality, and that's a key element of this.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you can see here, the goals that are being placed towards us, the goal is to be able to achieve in this new industry context, and Agile was felt to be a way in which could possibly help in that respect. So thanks, Mitch, for the moment. What we're going to do now is just kind of move on to the journey we've been through, allowing us to get to our current state of the activities we're performing today. And if we go back to the journey we've been along, we can actually go back a couple of years now, where I've been engaged with Visteon through events, conferences, and we'd met each other a few occasions, but there was a decision that really the organisation needed to explore what Agile could mean to them. And Mitch was part of the executive set that was in a workshop a couple of years ago, where we made sure everybody truly understood what it was to be Agile and the proper understanding of some of the myths and misconceptions and how they needed to be overcome. We had a lot of fun that day with a lot of exercise-driven learning, and that's hopefully followed through now in what we do with the rest of the organisations. And very importantly, we made sure that the execs realised that Agile sometimes isn't as simple as people make it out to be, and for a large organisational transformation, it would need to pick up on some of the at-scale and disciplined Agile practices that you can see listed here, such as disciplined Agile delivery. We kind of established a bit of a burning platform, as it says. So then we had the interest of the execs, and they saw some opportunities, but, okay, we got some interest, but had we really managed to get things fully operational? Well, obviously, as you can imagine, we sowed the seed, but it took a little while for us to be able to get things really moving. And it was actually part of a change of senior leadership who said, we saw you started on that Agile path. We really need to push it along. And one of the suggestions was, well, let's get some education to the wider community, get some feedback, some thoughts, some experience or at least understanding out there in the field, and make sure that we kind of set the scene for what we want to do into the future. I was actually engaged to help with the definition of some Agile training. Primarily, initially, it was all about Scrum, but we recognized very quickly that the education needs to be much broader than that, and that it would also need to be part of a much wider change program as well. So we had, by the end of last year, a number of pilot education sessions that we were running across India, the US, the UK, and they really helped us get to the point where we had a beginning of awareness in a lot of the leaders of many peer communities, and also the ability to be able to cascade that knowledge as well through the larger community around those individuals. We started off something very, very quickly with two portions of education. A one-day awareness session where everybody in the organization that had anything to do with software delivery teams within electronics had the chance to learn about principles, techniques, and the typical application of Agile in their environments. But we also recognized that we needed to develop some people who could really talk the talk and get a lot greater depth of understanding, and that's where we had an extra 2 days for those people who were going to have this Agile experience where we would simulate the kind of activity they would operate within in their workplace and give them the chance to be able to ask much deeper questions, consider how it could be applied in their own environments, and be able to then answer any questions from everybody else in the organization. I mean, for example, a week in each of those locations was really an intense time of trying to establish this capability. Having people attend, say, at the start of the week, a few of those become potential instructors, give them the chance to be able to get the depth of knowledge required, and then also the opportunity to practice their experience in teaching and cascading that knowledge to others. A great way of cascading, you definitely don't want outsiders like me trying to tell everybody how things are being done. It's much better when the stories and the relevance and the context can be provided by people from inside the organization who really see how Agile should work. So we've been through initial phases of education, and a lot of the feedback we were getting from those sessions, which was an important part of what we were doing, was trying to make sure that people got the chance to give us a view on what was next, a view on what it was going to take to make Agile a success inside Visteon. The key thing that came out was that a simplistic view of Agile was not going to be enough for an organization like them. It had to be more than Scrum. Scrum as Agile development, very powerful, very useful, very value-driven, as it says here at the bottom of this continuum, and it's very much about the individual project team. However, a lot of complexity, a lot of challenges in what's going on with delivery inside the organization, so a lot of risk, coordination, governance, and awareness of the wider enterprise was essential. And if we're also going to look at very large teams distributed around the world, highly segregated solution sets because of the complexity of the technical domain, we had to be very clever and smart about how we establish the right Agile mix for the whole organization. And again, we saw disciplined Agile delivery, something that's regularly discussed in IBM circles as part of that solution. So one thing we were very fortunate to have in place as well in those couple of years that I've talked about there was a move towards RTC. And Mitch, do you want to talk a little bit more about that, since you were fundamental to its rollout?
That's right. Yeah, I mean, prior to RTC, we were on, we had ClearCase and ClearQuest established globally. We had those set up, and we're using those. We tried to adopt UCM, Unified Change Management, which was a kind of an enhancement of ClearCase, ClearQuest, bringing the two together. We'd had a bit of a failed rollout of that, but it was actually, at the time, I think it was about 2008, it served as a great learning case for us as a case example. As we looked at what went wrong and why do we go wrong. And then in 2010, 2011, we started looking at rational team concert. Well, we looked at various other tools around at the time, made the selection on RTC, and then started to roll that out. Initially with the planning and tracking, and defect tracking and project management side of it, and then later on we brought in the configuration management part of it. Now, when we first started looking at it, we didn't particularly take it because it would give us an agile working tool set, but more it became clear later on that it did actually provide us a great foundation for this. And as Julian says, there was a bigger push in the middle of last year. We had a new director join the organisation. His focus was software only. His mandate day one was you're going to go agile. And because of that, and because we had the tooling in place, in many respects, it did help us along that path. So it helped us, as it says, to support the larger agile and scaled teams. But it helps us with some of the discipline and consistency in the way we work, and with some of the reporting and the data that we need to generate, and manage the business. So it's been a good step forward, I think, for us. It's gone hand in hand with this.
It has. It's been excellent. It's been really great supporting part, and we'll come back to that as part of our conversation later as well. Of course, one of the classic challenges, though, is people getting overly focused perhaps on the tool or the process and not recognising that the mix is really important. And again, we'll come back to that as part of our conversation. Next thing, so that took us on our journey up until earlier this year and what we were able to achieve with regard to rolling out and cascading. But one of the big things we had to do was make sure that we had the right members of the right communities engaged in a workshop for change, because we recognised it wasn't a simple change management process we were looking at here. We had quite an extensive amount of change to put into the organisation, and we had to get the right buy-in and understanding first. So what we looked to do as we moved into that workshop was understand the kind of feedback we'd received from the training. One thing we really wanted to do in every training course was conclude every session with a retrospective. This was retrospective on the course itself, but also a retrospective with regard to the topics we discussed, the concerns we may have raised, and the things that people attending felt that now needed to be addressed. This was excellent for us as input to our workshop. It really gave us a chance to see what commonality there was around the organisation, also allowed the real people on the ground to contribute to what they felt needed to be the investment priorities for us as a change team. We had managed to cascade to quite a lot of people by the time we got to end of Q1 this year, and if you're looking at 3-4 months of activity, we were up to over 600 people in total have been through our cascade, which was a pretty impressive start, but again, plenty more still to go. And as you can imagine, from 600 people, there was plenty of feedback received. I'm going to pull in one quickly. I know I said I was going to save questions majority at the end. Did we get a diversity of feedback from different teams depending on where they were and what they were working on, and was there consistency across those co-located or dispersed teams? I think on the whole, the most feedback we got was consistent, no matter they were dispersed or co-located. But the dispersed ones, of course, did raise the issue of challenges around communication, collaboration, and building relationships. We'll come back on that, but I would say that was probably one of the differences we did get between some of the teams. Now, having got all that feedback in our workshop, and we were great opportunity to get quite a few people into our workshop. I'll explain who in a moment. But in our workshop, we wanted to make sure that because we had some people who had been very heavily engaged already, others who were new to it, and some who weren't actually even sure why they were at the workshop, we needed to make sure that we got a consistent baseline to allow everybody to participate effectively. So one of the things we did first was to have a scan. We wanted to make sure we picked up on all of the feedback, that we made sure we shared experience of what's been currently happening in the organisation. We wanted to make sure we looked around at similar kinds of organisations and what they were doing. And we wanted to make sure that everybody was agreed upon the set of challenges that we were needing to address. Of course, in that too, we needed to make sure we had a concise boundary of what our scope was, our vision for what we were trying to achieve. And that allowed us then to start thinking about focusing on a set of activities that we were hoping to actually address and change. That shared vision, those change areas, allowed us then to start thinking about, well, if we were to take on these things, what activities and what changes were we looking to progress? And having got a big bucket list now, we had to make sure that very clearly we knew what our priorities were. You can come up with hundreds of things that you could potentially do in an organization, but very importantly, we need to make sure we prioritize them. And having got priorities, that meant we could put them into some kind of plan, make sure we've got appropriate owners, and make sure that we got some timelines and the quick wins in place, and the most difficult things that we need to target to make sure we got the right kind of progress. That scan, focus, act approach took pretty much the whole of a week with our major workshop group, and you wonder how on earth we managed to fill that much time. Well, I can assure you, by the end of the week, we had a very good plan of what we were trying to achieve, but we really needed the time to invest in understanding what we were trying to do in the first place. So we had quite a lot of attendees. Mitch did a great job of managing to gather quite a great representation. As you can see from the role types, we've got human resources in there, very important. I'll come back to more about people later on. People directly engaged in product management, as it says here, the project management activities, and then effectively everybody engaged in delivery of the physical products as well. Obviously, with the likes of Mitch and I too, we had representation around the definition of the approaches and the tools people could be supported by. We also got a good representation from locations as well. And we also felt that was very important. No way did we want this to be seen as a just UK-driven initiative. We had to have everybody from around the organisation to feel that they were having their part and their voice heard. By the way, second from the left at the back is Mitch, and second from the right at the bottom is myself, in case you were wondering. So, what do we establish as our shared vision? Well, why are we here was one of the key questions we had to ask ourselves. Agile itself was not the objective. We weren't there because the organization wanted to become Agile. It's because of the mission statement we heard earlier. We want to improve, and we want to improve in the context of product delivery. And so improvement was really the key message. But then, of course, we had to think, well, who is going to be involved in this improvement? And it had to be recognized that it was much wider than just the pure Visteon Electronics software teams as well. Had to look at everybody in the organization that engaged with those teams, out to how we communicated with the clients and how the clients saw what was going in the organization too. Scope? Well, as I mentioned earlier, we could try and change everything. We could change everything about the organization. Would we be allowed? Probably not. Would it actually be the best return on investment? Again, not likely. But so we had to make sure that we focused on maximizing the amount of value, whilst also ensure we targeted specific risk areas in the organization too. And when we talk about risks, well, what were the things that were going to stop us being a success? There were plenty. We identified a lot. Some of them were around misconceptions, some of them about false expectations, and also some of them around the fact that different cultures occur in different parts of the organization and because of different locations that we need to address. And also, of course, if anything needs changing, it needs funding. So we had to be very clear about the expectations we had for any change we were going to propose. So we, at the end of it, to cut a long story short, hopefully now on that workshop, by the end of our week, we had 14 change areas. These 14 change areas were an aggregation of the total sets of activities, opportunities, threats that we saw that we needed to work on and address. I'm going to go through, actually, very briefly, all 14 of these, and I suggest that if anybody's got any questions to ask any of the 14, you can take a note of the area, maybe even the number, and we'll make sure we address the detail around that one as we get toward the end of today's session. But recognizing we're close to halfway through our time and really getting to the meat of the content now, I'm going to push on and I'll bring Mitch in as we find things where he's specifically engaged in them as well. So the first area that we wanted to address was make it sure we understood what kind of agile framework the organization would need. We certainly recognize that the variety of work and the variety of teams going on was definitely not going to have a one-size-fits-all defined step-by-step prescriptive approach to Agile. Of course, in itself, that isn't being Agile. And equally, though, a framework had to be able to adapt to the context of the user's scenario. We certainly recognize a foundation of Scrum with extreme programming type of technical practices and using the kind of rounded, context-driven selection you get in disciplined Agile delivery was certainly going to give us a great foundation. Now, when it comes to defining what kind of things people should be doing, we also wanted to make sure that it wasn't seen as an ivory tower definition activity. We certainly wanted to make sure that anybody out there using Agile practices and techniques had a chance to contribute to what our definition of the approach should look like. So make sure they feel like they own the approach, have them the ability to contribute their ideas, their feedback, and so that we didn't kind of work in isolation from the real practitioners. We were going to provide lots of default templates, tool schemas, give people something other than a blank sheet to work with, but of course we can't mandate stuff if it's not actually going to necessarily fit their context. And very importantly, we have to do some work too to think about how we align to kind of compliance frameworks. Also here we're talking specifically about the automotive scenario. So automotive SPICE is pretty important too, systems engineering ISO standards, and also CMMI with regard to maturity levels that we're looking to achieve in different parts of the organization as well. A very key part and foundation to what we're doing being that framework. And the next piece area we went into now really highlighted the value of having HR, human resources, in our meeting. I think the lady who joined us at first wondered why on earth she was there. But I think one of the anecdotes she gave by the end of the week was that she hadn't been engaged in something that was so specifically targeting the progression of people in such a long time. And it was amazing what that was going to do for helping HR in their role in empowering improvement in the organization. And so we recognized there were a number of things that needed to be adjusted in the organization, such as some understanding about culture change, how we reward and measure individuals. Of course, we had to think about the team, and this was quite a really positive point for HR, thinking about how team development was going to come in to what we look to do. Equally, we had to think about training and breadth of skills, making sure that we have people able to work across different areas and not necessarily locked into a silo. And a lot of behavior change as well was going to be coming through as part of that. Important too, not just how we establish people's behaviors, but also allocation of skills. I think one of the things that Mitch and I both hear regularly in the organization is the challenge of context switching. This challenge of specialists and recognized leaders having to constantly move between teams. And they constantly told us about how difficult that was for them in being able to give real value to any one team because of the constant context switching. And equally, we had to start thinking about who we're going to play and how do we adapt some of these agile roles in the organization too. Somebody has this title. Does it lock them down to a specific way of working, or does it encourage them to play their right role within the right teams? Mitch, anything else to add there? I know you've been working on a lot of this kind of team allocation things too.
Yeah, I mean, we're still working on that, but I can't overemphasize enough how important it was, I think, to have human resources as a part of this, because fundamentally we're looking at changing people and behaviours and the way they're rewarded and recognised, and that's really an HR function. That's not an engineering type function, and having HR there really helped us out, I think. So anyone that's thinking about doing this, about changing an organisation or adopting Agile, you've really got to go back and think about your people, how you recognise your people, how you reward your people, how you train your people, all of these kind of issues that are around people and managing people. It's fundamental in this. I think this was we kind of went out on this a little bit, I think, because it was really important.
It was.
Topic. Yeah.
And we've seen that coming from the questions we're just receiving in now, as they're talking about changing the command and control kind of mindset and changing performance review. And that's critical. Some of the training, we actually try to demonstrate the futility of command and control as well. And that's a real eye-opener for a lot of these managers who get involved.
Yeah, I saw one of the questions there, how do we change? I mean, we're still looking at this, but it's something we recognise that we can't. How do we recognise a team as opposed to now where we really focus on an individual? We haven't got an answer for that one yet, but we know it's a question and we know we need to address it and figure out what is the way forward. Haven't got an answer, but it's something we need to do and go away and think of. So it's, it's a work in progress, but it's out there. We know we need to do it.
And thankfully, as you said, we have HR involved in working out the answer to that as well. And, it may sound like a simple thing to address, but when you've got a very large organization with, there's elements of, there's unions elements in there, there's kind of pay scale, there's kind of acquisition, there's kind of contract challenges. There's all sorts of challenges about how people are contracted to work that can also have a big influence on this too. So the next piece we wanted to move on to was estimation planning and reporting. This is, I don't think there's anything unique here necessarily with regard to the challenge we had at Visteon here, but it just kind of recognizes some of the challenges any organization is going to find. Obviously, everybody has to do some kind of upfront estimate. Could we potentially refine that to allow us to recognize the changing nature of work when you've got a broader set of roles engaged throughout as opposed to siloed groups who have to do handovers along the way? This could change some of those early models and also allow us to be able to better allocate people over time as opposed to in big chunks and balance actually the use of people's skills across many projects. We also talked about lots of techniques around sprint estimation and relative estimation and the benefits of that into teams, but also recognizing this will give us some new data that we need to potentially use and give us more honest measures of what's really happening as opposed to the classic speculatives driven by effort spent. We were also very keen to make sure that we started capturing real actual effort and make sure that got fed back into the estimation process. You get those classics in an organization where everybody just tracks 7.5-hour days no matter what they actually do, and we need to get much smarter about capturing real effort so we can have a better understanding of what we're really doing. Transparency as usual, making sure everybody really can see what's going on. Equally also removing some of the challenges of formal reporting effort where you actually seem to spend as much time translating the data you have into a format that somebody else wants and trying to get management layers happy to look at real-time data and formats through tooling often that allows them to see what's really going on without necessarily disturbing the team. And again, definitions of done. We have to make sure that our teams have got a really close understanding of stakeholder needs and that those demonstrations are actually stuff that people could take, other stakeholders could take and potentially use and prove from the success of what's been done so far. So a lot of stuff in there that, of course, is pretty normal for an organization. Likewise, requirements capture, the strategy of requirements capture too. We felt that we need to do some work around that contractual scope definition, classic Agile changes again. How do you scope and bound what you're planning to do? Very key in that, though, was making sure that we perhaps changed the client's engagement and their obligation to engagement too. This meant that we managed to get a greater real-time engagement with the client through the kind of product owner role and making sure that we had, if we don't have the real client playing product owner, our own people in Visteon were better placed to play that proxy role and make sure that we get a better just-in-time capture of what's truly required today as opposed to what was speculated some months ago. We also wanted to make sure that we could come up with a way that was allow us to be more incremental and collaborative in the capture of requirements and documentation too, through tools like wikis, where it was far more transparent what's going on. Everybody can collaborate. Those people reviewing can see things real time, and it can minimize the risk and often the waste that can come from kind of isolated document capture. And also we wanted to make sure that if we are being asked to capture certain types of information, is it still adding value? And if it's not, or limited value, let's rethink what we're trying to do and how we capture that information to make sure we're a little smarter about the whole thing. And there's been a lot of discussion about this, hasn't there, Mitch, about the engagement with client. And of course that takes us to the people who are going to have to face off to the clients, the product owners as well, the real product managers.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we I mentioned earlier, we're a very conservative, very traditional type of product development organisation. We like to go to our customer, that we would negotiate a set of requirements for a component, whatever, up front, and then we try and deliver that and manage change incrementally. Now, we struggle with that because the customer obviously doesn't know a lot of the time exactly what they want. There's a lot of change. There's a lot of unknowns at the front. We try to document that and have these great big documents where we think we've got everything written down, and actually it's a false, there's false security in there. It's not really helping either us. Now, contractually, we still need to work with our customer, and it's not an open-ended development. We still need to bound what we do for them. We can't just put lots of people on these things. It needs to be controlled. But it needs to be much more collaborative, and it's an area where we want to try and work more closely with our customers, because it'll benefit them as well as it benefits us. So it's a win-win situation, but we need to get it right.
Yes, absolutely, and not only with the customers, but also between different groups in the Visteon organisation too, where we were talking about the hardware teams just got to have sight of what the software guys are thinking about, and vice versa. The more we can increase transparency, the easier it'll be for their successful integration. The next topic we had, briefly again, and we're coming more into the technical side with the architecture. One of the big conversations that came out when I was with the Indian product teams was the way in which the organisation was mapped to the architecture of the solution set, and of course that means then you have more of a mindset around, well, I work on this component, and I'm not really thinking about the end result value that I'm going to be delivering. So certainly there's been a lot of discussion about how you cut the organisation perhaps in two ways, with common components with one teams and kind of pipes, thin slices through the whole architecture to be able to deliver real results. And that's going to make a difference, but again, as I mentioned here, that does mean quite an investment in the overall product architecture itself. Then we have the opportunity to broaden people's awareness of how to work with more of those component parts, such that they may not be the expert in one, but they know how to consume it effectively, and they can assemble the right components to be able to deliver the end result as a team, as opposed to having to rely upon other people and be synchronized with them in the delivery of the end result. I think, I imagine, Mitch, that's still an ongoing conversation with you right now as well, that architectural change, of course, particularly with an acquisition, too, that's recently occurred.
Exactly, yeah. It's an ongoing one as to what's the best architecture, trying to develop scalable architectures for all of our product range, because we have a very diverse product range, and it's a constant challenge. So, yeah, it's an ongoing discussion that we have on that one.
And as ever, whenever we're talking about Agile, there are different groups that kind of get worried, particularly those people who wonder about the level of ceremony and the appropriate level of governance around testing of solutions too. One of those urban myths that we're being Agile, hence we're not being thorough in our testing. Well, absolutely not, and making sure that quality assurance, verification and validation steps in delivery come into the definition of done for the teams, but also make sure that we put in place those post-sprint further test activities and automation to allow that all to be done as effectively as possible. And getting the test community heavily engaged in what's going on is going to be a major success. The next piece, at scale, I kind of related to this earlier. I probably won't dwell on it too much right now, but Okay, so we work with Scrum and we like everything that's in there. We had lots of good technical practices from XP. You saw continuous integration in itself as a separate initiative for the for electronic software, and we also then start to think about really large teams who are distributed that also have to work with third parties, or also have to work with people that aren't necessarily being as agile and probably quite linear in their style, aligning to people that aren't actually engaged with software. And then you've got to do it all in a compliance with an automotive industry as well. There is a lot of potential support practices, guidance that needs to be in place to allow us to overcome a lot of those challenges. And we're also trying to make sure that a fair bit of that comes into the depth education we provide too. One of the things we're looking at here is establishing some kind of coaching and mentoring network to allow specific education to be placed at important milestones in the life of an initiative, the development of a product, so that we can actually get in at the right time, make sure people have the right agile practices in place, and ensure that then as they progress, we can introduce further practices to support them as they scale and distribute over time. But again, scale, and of course with recent acquisitions, even more countries and even more products and clients involved as well now, Mitch. I guess that's just getting pretty huge at the moment.
It is getting massive. I mean, you know, we've touched on before, we're a product development organisation, and we're dealing with multidisciplinary teams, and it's not only a software problem. We're talking about electrical engineers, mechanical engineers. We've all got to work together. We've all got to understand what we're all talking about. You know, part of the Agile awareness course was run out to all of the different engineers from different disciplines, so at least they had an understanding of what the terms meant. So if the engineers said, well, we're going to do this in this sprint, or we're going to do that in this scrum, at least they knew what those words meant, and they weren't seen as talking in a foreign language. So it's been trying to scale this up for the whole organisation is a challenge. Yeah, it's a big organisation.
And hence, the journey with JCI is actually starting from next week with education now in Bulgaria and other parts of the United States, which hadn't previously been reached before. So, yes, in some ways we're having to revisit that part of our change process, which I'll come to again shortly. The next piece I wanted to bring up, and we kind of touched on some of it with what Mitch describes earlier with RTC, but tool support. Obviously, tools like RTC give you that transparency of planning and the ability for teams to collaborate effectively, and the reporting that's there as well. And also there are consistent use of certain requirements and testing tools in the organization. Obviously, though, as an organic environment, people are going to pick and choose things in different ways, and diversity in the tool set is something that we're going to have to keep pushing along. In fact, again, acquisition, no doubt, a whole load of new tools as well that are going to have to be dealt with there. Mitch, anything in particular that you're aware of that we're going to have to be picking up on here in the tool support?
Yeah, well, the first thing was RTC. It was, well, what are JCI using at the moment? I think they formed from several companies that have several, at the moment, configuration management systems and defect management systems. It's been decided everyone's going to go with RTC, which is great, but obviously there's an investment in that. We need to provide training, we need to provide support just to get the guys onto RTC. They've got to go through the same migration path pretty much that we did, a little bit helped by the fact that we have some experience of it now, so kind of doing it second time, hopefully it's a little bit easier. It's still a lot of work. I mean, we're still talking about 1,000 software engineers that need to be brought on board, so there's going to be some big challenges along the way just to get them onto RTC. Now, there's some other tooling around as well that we use. Julian's mentioned here, we're trying to improve collaboration tools, give transparency, enable people to collaborate where we have our global teams. So there's a lot going on the tooling front to understand. One, bring the two companies together, but two, look at how could we make our engineers work more efficiently. The telephone and the email is not an ideal communications tool. There are better ones out there. So what are they, and how do we get people using them?
Absolutely, and that's kind of leads to those bottom bullet points. I mean, trying to find better ways of transparency, communication, and of course, all that transparency is what we're trying to build a trust between everybody in the organisation. That's obviously one of the biggest challenges you have of separation is, what are those guys doing over there? And equally, in each individual space, we want to make sure we've got a more agile, conducive work environment, the adding of whiteboards, the ability for teams to be able to have stand-up spaces, and also think about the two. People don't stay at their desk even when they're working as part of a specific team. Try to co-locate teams to one place. People can go to work with a team as opposed to work in isolation from their team. That can make a massive difference, and that, of course, might lead to some cynically called sometimes interior decorating, just breaking down those spaces and breaking down those walls so people can sit together. The last major topic area was about the education we were referring to there as well. And we've been updating our training on a constant basis, adding more references to Visteon context, also adding more training that can help around the use of the tools. And equally, we're looking at how can we actually simulate a project with tools, not just through whiteboards and discussion, but with the tools as well, so that people get to feel their way through the setup, establishment, and management of a project using those tools. Equally, we're adding education around different stakeholders. There's people having to play the product owner role. There's clients themselves, how they get engaged, giving them just a snapshot of education that can give them greater confidence in working with our teams. And equally, too, if people want to be able to validate their experience and prove to themselves and others that they've grown in their ability, looking at certification, too, that allows people to be able to demonstrate that they've got a real passion and drive for this and they really want to keep advancing their own personal achievement. Final last piece in here, and again, something Mitch are going to be heavily involved with, or you are already heavily involved with, is the Agile Initiative team. We recognize that you can't just have people working in a very part-time capacity. We need people who are really close to their own communities and able to take that information out there as champions of what we're trying to achieve. But also we need expertise from each of the areas of the organization to give us the right inputs and feedback on what we're trying to do. Mitch, I guess we've got a growing set of those people and our locations will continuously grow. But we created a network, didn't we, of a matrix, as it were, of each of the areas of the business and which different territories and areas we need to remain regularly engaged with. And that list, I guess, is our team.
That's right. It's really important that we engage with everyone and that everyone has some kind of representation, because there are so many issues globally with this, whether they're cultural, regional, whatever. We don't want it to be seen as this team in one place doing it, telling the rest of the world what to do, because that won't work. We need everyone kind of engaged. Now, as I said, we've got a couple of thousand software engineers, so we can't get everyone personally involved, but at least everyone from each of the major regions has got someone they can go to and talk to and understand what's going on and can be their advocate and can manage that change in that region, can understand the issues, the regional differences and what's going on. So it's really important to have a team, a multi-discipline team, a multi-region team, that everyone has a say in this. Everyone, no matter what kind of group you're part of, you've got a say in what's going on and you've got an understanding.
Absolutely, and very importantly, we've been trying to drink our own champagne in that respect in the use of RTC for the management of that team as well. Yeah. All our major initiatives and all the tasks associated with it, we're all in there to allow everybody to be able to track and transparently see what we're doing and achieving. And I guess that's been great too, Mitch, to have people see that RTC has that ability to cope with a very different type of initiative.
That's right, and it makes it very transparent as well for everyone, so which again is great, and people can go in and contribute and see what's going on. So making it open, that's the key thing, is make it open, let everyone see it.
So we're almost at a point where we can start looking at some more of those questions you've asked us, but I guess our message is there is a huge amount to be considered and worked on if you are really truly trying to become an agile organization. And well, more importantly, make sure your teams are operating as effectively as they can using agile practices through creating an organization that nurtures, supports and enables those teams to work in the way that you expect of them. Now, we've progressed a long way through this process in so much that we've had small pieces of the organization trying to become more agile in isolation. We've had different perspectives of what agile should be around the organization. We now have an acquisition which will bring in new inputs to what's going on, but equally we have a plan that really covers the organization worldwide about what it is our target areas are, who needs to be engaged with each of those, and who we need to make sure are part of that progression. Obviously, when you first go on your journey, you just don't know what you're going to need to change, and you don't know what it is that you need to focus upon. I think we're much clearer on that now. We are much clearer, and every time we get feedback from further training, from the initiatives, the people on the ground out there, we constantly improve that view. As Mitch reinforced earlier, our focus on people, culture, and behavior is absolutely key to our success. If we can't get people's mindsets changed and hearts and minds engaged and people actively wanting to be taking on this approach, it'd be very, very difficult to dictate it. Obviously, executive support helping dictate that this is the right way to go is useful. Also, the support of the sponsorship of the initiative also helps massively too. But already we're beginning to see rewards. Organizations beginning to feel that this is a much better, happier way for people to be working, and equally it's giving rewards with regard to the ability of the organization to be reactive to the types of change and movements in what they've got to deliver. Anything to add to that, Mitch? I mean, with regard to some of the more recent feedback and that you've been getting?
Nothing really. I mean, as I say, with the JCI acquisition, unfortunately, it slowed the move down a little bit. I hope once we start, you start with the training, we can get the momentum back up again and get it going again. It's certainly got, I think the support of everyone in the organisation. It just needs, there's obviously, the acquisition is unfortunately kind of slowed us down. We've had to take breath. There's some other issues that need attention first and foremost. Once we've got those out of the way, let's get back on this.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got about 5 minutes left where I'd like to just pick up on some of the questions that have already come through. We've got quite a few that have come through that we've captured here as well. So let's just pick up on one of them. So there was one question about wanting people to improve, not necessarily to become agile, and how we're able to shift the focus to agile that as opposed to other things that could be driving improvement. Well, I think right at the start we talked about the fact that within the Visteon Electronics and the software division's strategy, Agile was only one part. There was a lot around the consistency of use of tools, the consistency of integration, the regular continuous integration, and the use of open source and more consistent technologies in what's being done by the division. But again, Agile was just part of that. But what we didn't want was people to see Agile as being this, oh God, not another thing that you want to now change. It was a case of, well, actually, no, what you do, a lot of it's fantastic, and we don't want you to stop. What we want to do, though, is perhaps adapt some parts of how we work to enable that to be even more successful. So not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, making sure that we empower people to be doing the good stuff that we know that's out there. Anything else on that, Mitch? Because I think...
I think that the key with the Agile is the empowerment. It's about engineers feeling empowered and being able to do a good job and really taking ownership of what they do. And if they feel that there's a better way to do a process, try that. And it's like you say, don't throw the baby out of the bathwater. We were doing some good stuff before, and I think most people, internally recognise what they were doing well and maybe recognise, well, we could do this a bit better. So let's empower the people and let them change it. And that's the key, is the empowerment. But it becomes, that's the culture change, is to give that empowerment and for people to feel genuinely empowered and genuinely owning of what they do, and then they'll make it happen. Yeah.
So one of the questions we've been asking here is, how long has this journey been so far? So RTC was really getting underway towards the end of 2011. Is that right, Mitch?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think when did we sign in? I think we signed the contract for RTC. The December the 31st, 2010, and then we spent the first year or two with the planning and the tracking and just getting people into the tool and familiar with the tool. And then I think 2012, 2013, we focused on the configuration management side, and that was really around the tooling, but none of that was really focused on Agile. I think the Agile journey really started kind of sometime middle of last year. As I said, we had a new director start. Day one, his mandate was, we're going Agile. Let's make it happen, and that's when the real focus on Agile started, I think.
And really in the last, since middle of last year through to this year, we've been progressing well. Obviously business changed with an acquisition, put a bit of a hold on some of the elements, but now that's all really kicking off again now. And of course that didn't mean people out there had stopped in anything they were doing. There was certainly a lot of activity, and I'm really looking forward to getting the next layer of feedback from people as we start on our journey of reaching out to new communities again. Mitch, you're about to jump in.
Yeah, I was just thinking that or a comment. I think we have to understand it's not just right. Tomorrow we're going to be Agile. This is the new set of practices. Off you go. It is a journey, and it is about giving empowerment, and it is about continuing to do what you do, but then constantly trying to refine it, trying to do better, and that constant, what are we doing? How do we do it better? What are we doing? How do we do it better? That constant learning and improvement and owning it. So really it was putting the foundation and let people at least understand what it's about, because many people thought it was a kind of a tick box, like any other kind of process. No, it's not like that. It's about empowerment. Get that myth out of the way and then start the journey.
I'm just going to go with one extra question. I know we're almost right up on time. There's one talking now about problem children or people reluctance to change. People are always reluctant to change. Why should I change? It always worked for me, my way, etc. I think the best way we've addressed that is just to have an open and honest conversation with them, try to understand what their reluctance for change would be, or even just highlight to them opportunities. Okay, maybe they don't feel it's going to work for them, but at least we can show them the opportunities other people are going to have, and at least then perhaps not going to be a blocker to other people's results. We also make sure we've got change agents who are the peers of those individuals. And, once you start to get somebody in a community who's actually passionate about this stuff, it really takes the message forward much easier. And we're really working in that respect through stakeholders, part of our change community. It is making the difference. Right now, Susanna, I noticed that we're up on the time. Do we want to kind of bring that to a close and offer up our further discussion continued on Twitter if people want to?
Yeah, we can continue on Twitter. Sure, and we're also going to be adding a lot of these to the blog post.
Absolutely great, thank you. And if there are any questions we haven't managed to respond to, so if we have a blog post, we'll make sure that goes out to people, and we'll try to get answers to anything we haven't kind of covered off at this point. But you can see in front of you there ways of kind of raising questions via Twitter directly to me or with the hashtag there. But I think trying to stay within our time contract, even though I managed to kill a couple of minutes with my mute problem, I'd like to try and wrap up at that point. Mitch, thank you very much for joining us again for today's discussion. Again, Global Rush User Community, hopefully you found this very useful from us both. And thank you very much for everybody's time who's given it up to listen to us today. Susanna, back to you.
Great. Thank you, Julianne, and thanks, Mitch. Really great presentation and great discussion, and it's going to be available on the Global Rational User Community website, and we'll have more information available for you guys to download. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm signing out.
Your conference is ending now. As requested by the host, please hang up.